Hi there. There's a downturn occurring in the tech industry right now at the end of 2022. It's super scary for folks involved and possibly being made redundant, and for everyone else it's making us think, hey, could this be me next? I wanted to help give you the skills, if you don't have them already, in how to interview like a pro, in case you are in that situation and do need to start thinking about applying or looking for a new job. So I wanted to make this a video based off my own experience as a hiring manager, from a tech lead all the way up to a VP at a bunch of different large tech companies, banks, and so on. And I've tried to aggregate that experience into some of the best candidates that I've interviewed, but also as myself as an interviewee for some of the numerous jobs that I've applied to. And remember, everybody gets rejected from jobs, and that's part of that learning experience. So I'm hoping to distill some of the successes I've had and to give you some key tips around that. Please do like and subscribe if you like the videos, leave me a comment, and I'd love to know if some of these things worked for you. So first and foremost, let's start with the misconception around how the interview process works and the balance of power. Companies need applicants, right? Companies need to fulfill backfills, they need to fulfill new headcount. And so when a potentially good fit of a candidate comes along, they want you to succeed. There is a real misconception around there being 50 candidates for one job and everybody's better than you. That just simply isn't the truth. There might be a selection of decent candidates, and you really do have to sort of shine throughout that, but it isn't going to be the case that you make one wrong move and you're suddenly out of consideration. In fact, it's quite the opposite. As a hiring manager, I'm really wanting you to succeed and to tell me the things that help me to make that decision a bit easier. In fact, a lot of the questions that I will ask will be sort of encouragement to give you little pointers around telling me some of your background. And so just to lay the ground here, there's no wrong way to go about this in terms of you don't need to go in there and sort of think that you're this person under the lens. But what I think you should try and think about is to change the power dynamic a little bit by using the questions that you're given as an opportunity to expand. So here's an example. Technical lead comes in and says, hey, tell me about this system you built at X company. You could just answer it directly, say, as little as possible. You could embellish it a bit, talking a little bit further. Or what you could do is you could speak to the question, and then you could ask, is it okay if I talk a little to this? You might find it interesting. The interviewer is then being asked a question, which sort of pushes them off foot a bit. I really found that challenging when a candidate asked me that, and I like it because it shows that they are trying to expand upon the answer outside of the original parameters that have been set. So as an example, I built this system. Can I tell you a little bit about some of the stuff that was really funny that took us a while to fix? You're instantly going into narrative mode there. And when you start going into that narrative mode, you can become the main character, and your best friend, impact, and mobility within the organization are going to help you to tell that story. How did I help other people, and what was my impact? Those are really the two things that you're looking for as a hiring manager when somebody's telling you this story. Now, of course, this depends on your role, right? You might be hiring DevOps engineers, technical authors. You could also be looking for any number of different personas. But generally speaking, you want to identify the candidate as having the attributes to make them successful within your team. And if they have the ability to work with other folks, they've had an impact, then that's a really good signal. So as a candidate, when you feel a little bit overwhelmed, or even if you need to reset the cadence, you're feeling a little bit, you're getting a bit flushed, you're feeling like it's going a bit too fast, try and reset the balance of the interview on the next question when they say, okay, well, tell us about Java 8 versus Java 9. You can say something like, okay, well, what I know is this, and I can tell you that we've been doing such and such at my organization. What's really nice by doing that is that, again, you're expanding that answer, but it's obvious that you're trying to add color to that, add your own experience to that. And that instantly puts you in their good graces because they can see that you're the kind of candidate that wants to, not necessarily impress, but wants to give a level of authenticity to your response. And that comes to another point that I wanted to make here. Don't ever say that you know something that you don't know. Don't put stuff on your CV that you're not comfortable talking about. Now, if you say something on your CV like, I'm comfortable with Linux, that's great. If you put something on your CV like expert at Linux kernel, I'll ask you about it, right? Interviewers will ask you because that's interesting. They're not necessarily looking to probe to see if you're making stuff up, but they do want to know, okay, what part of that are you an expert in? Is it the TCP/IP stack? Is it the file system? Is it the system D? Tell us about it. And so don't put stuff that you're not comfortable answering. And equally, if you're asked a question like, what is the difference between these Java versions, or what do you think about this? Say, well, truth be told, I'm not particularly sure. But then what you need to do is to offer insight in return. If you don't know the answer to something, that's fine. I don't know the answer to a lot of things. But what I'll say is, I don't know but it's never really impacted me. However, I can see that coming up on the horizon. So I think, like you're asking, that's something I need to upskill myself on. You're showing a level of humility by doing this. You're acknowledging that there are gaps in your knowledge, but you're also showing that you are self-aware enough to think, well, yeah, you're asking about it, so it surely must be something that I need to skill up on. Believe it or not, this has happened to me in interviews. I mean, believe it. I there's tons of stuff I get wrong all the time. But, someone says to me, okay, well, how does the file system mounting work with this type of block storage? And I'll say, well, I understand these components, I understand this level, but it's kind of fuzzy there. We could talk about it. Maybe you can help me fill the gaps. By doing that, you see how you're creating this rapport with the interviewer. You're making it a more interactive story. It's not them just answering and response, like sin and act. You're actually starting to bring them into the collaboration of helping you to succeed in the interview. And this is, as I mentioned at the start of this video, part of the psychology. It's not manipulation. It is not coercion. It is about how to get them to collaborate. They want you to succeed. So if you say, look, I don't know about this. Is this really part of the job? Can you tell me a bit more about why this is something you ask? That's a fair game question. Interviewers often won't know. They'll often just be given a set of questions. And what you could say is, what are your thoughts on this? Like, I've given you the breadth of my knowledge. I know that there's some gaps. Could you help me fill in? Because obviously we're past that question point. And often they'll say, yeah, okay, well, you could have asked this, you could have said that. And generally speaking, this is just a question we put in there so that candidates can show us the extent of X, Y, Z. So you're learning more about the interview process, you're learning more about the company, and you're getting the interviewer more on side. So it's a really powerful mechanism. Just building on this idea of a narrative, something that is really powerful is this idea of telling your story, but sharing your wins and your losses. The reason you do that is because it creates an emotional connection with the interviewer. It gets them vested into your story. So for example, if they say, okay, tell us of a time you put together the highest amount of production microservices in your career and what the technologies you used. That is the perfect opportunity to tell a story about when I was working at this company, we decided that we needed to go to this type of architecture. It was really challenging because of X, Y, Z. That's the basic answer. But to expand on that, you start to talk about, well, what we did really well was that we came together as a team and we nailed that architecture in the first month. Then the losses, what we didn't know is that there was a major upgrade and that caused so much trouble. And you wouldn't believe that I was up to 2 a.m. doing X, Y, Z. And so the interviewer is at this point getting really interested in the way that you tell that story and the way that you're able to pull them in and make them empathize with that, because surely they've been there, right? Especially if they're on the same team or potentially in the same group as you. So building that rapport through an honest connection is super powerful. If someone was to say, hey, Alex, tell us of the largest SRE team you've ever managed. That's such an arbitrary question, but I can use that as a springboard to talk about a whole bunch of other stuff. Like, the team was really large, especially because we had to do this follow the sun model. It was tricky because setting up, rotors and schedules was really tough using the ITSM we had. That was interesting because I then had to bring in X, Y, Z people. It's great to be able to tell those stories, and it's also really important that you understand when to finish an answer. So I've expressed that you should sort of give all of these little flourishes, embellishments, ask questions back if you can expand, but also know when is rambling and too much. So keep judging the engagement of the interviewer. Try and judge, have I spoken for 5 minutes non-stop? I would naturally break every maybe 60 to 90 seconds, say, should I continue? Is that good? Or should I expand on this a little further? Give the interviewer a chance to wake up from just being in passive mode and say, oh yeah, continue. And that will really help you. And I think, the final thing that I'll say is interviewing is a skill. Interviewers are not typically trained at tech companies. Just let that sink in, right? So you will become an engineer at a tech company, a documentation writer, a tech lead, a software engineer, a DevOps engineer, an SRE, etc. You don't typically have training on how to be a good interviewer, right? You are just given a sheet of questions and you are kind of asked to give a review on this person. It's immensely unfair because a lot of the folks who are doing this may have their own bias, may also not quite know how to interpret the differences of cultural differences, for example, and it ends up having a lot of very tough interviews with people who undeservingly probably get rejected. Do as much as you can as a candidate to try and level that playing field. Come across with your honest self. Try and tell that story. Try and help them to understand your journey and the things you do and don't know, but to generally understand your characteristics that make you a great fit for this role. I hope that was useful. These are my sort of top tips around how to interview like a pro. We're talking about acknowledging the power dynamics of applying for a job, the narration of your story, talking about impact, sharing your wins and losses, also building that rapport through communication, and then explaining how you built solutions rather than features and how that improves people's lives. I talked a bit earlier about mobility across the team and how you've worked with other people. And very much lastly, be completely honest around when you don't know things and just share insights around, that was a great question. I think that definitely is a gap in my knowledge. Thank you for helping me to grow through the interview process. So yeah, please do like and subscribe if you found it useful, and I'll see you soon. Bye.